sometimes I think I make less stupid mistakes and then I'll go and do something really stupid like this one. Hello, welcome back to another video. This week I am continuing with stash busting and I'm going to be making myself a iconic, classic shirt dress for summer. I think these are great for summer. They're super easy to throw on. They look put together. They're great, comfy, perfect summer staple, if you will. If you're new here, hi, I'm Olga, and I make sewing content that is usually vintage inspired and sometimes a little bit nerdy. The fabric I want to use for this week, this Viscose Challis. I think this is a really nice fabric for summer because it's really, really lightweight. It's very comfortable. And this is from Minerva. I got it in a goodie bag at their anniversary party. I don't know the name off by heart, but I'll leave it in the description. Obviously, I'll leave a link and all of that. For pattern, I'm going to be making the Tailor Armidale dress, and it's a really simple, classic shirt dress. The things I want to change, I think, about this is the pocket, obviously, because there's an inseam pocket, and we all know how I feel about those. So I'm going to be making a pocket that goes into the waistline. I have made this dress before, and I made it with the original pocket, and I regret it every time I wear it. So the other thing I'm thinking is if I have enough fabric, I want to make the facings a little bit wider, because in the other version that I have, facings want to come to the outside, even though I understitched them and all that. If they were a little bit wider, this wouldn't happen. So I'm going to test that out, see if I have enough fabric, if I can make that happen. Yeah. Let's go get started. I started off by laying my fabric with right sides together out on my desk and getting the pattern pieces out. I have pre-washed this fabric and all of that, so you should be very proud of me. Anyway, I quickly realized that I actually needed more space to be able to place the pattern pieces on the fabric all at once, so I could actually visualize how things were gonna be placed. And so I moved to the floor and assumed the patented Rachel Maxey floor troll position. Here I went back and forward a bunch to figure out the placement of the pieces on the fabric in order to get everything cut on grain. And yes, I am now wearing pajamas because that lemon dress is very cute, but it's not super comfy to do all of these, super acrobatic moves in. I decided to cut out the facings from a different fabric so that I could actually get everything else cut from the floral. I went with this pale green cotton. I think it matches the greens and the floral print really well, and it was also the only fabric in my stash that sort of matched and also I had enough of, so really it wasn't that much of a choice, but yeah, happy accident, I guess. It is now day 2 of our project. So I have the fabric cut and I have the facings cut. I did have to cut the facings out of a different fabric because there wasn't enough. And I'm now a little bit skeptical because I think this fabric is 140 wide and the pattern said that you need about 2.20 meters of 140 fabric. So I'm not sure, I know that 20 more centimeters would have made a little bit of a difference, but I don't know if it would have made that much. Oh, hello. Because not only did I not manage to get the facings on there, I also didn't manage to get all panels for the skirt, which I didn't realize until later. So I only realized when I was marking the panels and the fabric that I had to have 4 side panels. So I have 2 panels for the front, 1 panel cut on the fold for the back, and then 2 side back and 2 side front panels. And I only cut 2 side panels, so I don't have 4. I don't have any more fabric. This is how much fabric I have left. I have this little bit, and then I have this other little bit, but it's all very small scraps. Once I had realized that I didn't cut enough panels, this pattern is a little bit weird in that it doesn't say cut X amount. It'll say collar cut 1 pair. I know what 1 pair is, but it just is a little bit confusing at times because this one says cut 1 and this one says cut 1 pair. The thing is, when you're laying stuff out, you're looking at the number and it gets a little bit confusing. So I did cut a pair of this, even though I only needed 1. On the side panels, it did say cut 2 pairs, but I honestly didn't look at it. I'm going to be honest with you. If you've been watching my videos for a while, I go into these things with just blind confidence, and I'm just winging it a lot of the time. And I'm here just to let you know that we all make mistakes. It's fine. It's totally normal. I don't think I've made a single garment in my life that hasn't had a mistake in it, that I haven't had a little oopsie in, that I haven't had to like unpick something or like work around something that was either my own like fault out of like being distracted or not reading the instructions properly or whatever, or maybe it was something else that like, I mean, I didn't know that technique all that well. Like, it's my first time working with this fabric. Sometimes I think I make less stupid mistakes and then I'll go and do something really stupid like this one. Okay, the thing is, even if I had realized while I was cutting the fabric that I didn't have enough fabric, I still wanted to make this dress out of this fabric. So I was still gonna figure out a way to make it work. Like, maybe I would have had more control over it. So what I did on Friday, apart from cutting it out and all of that, was figure out what I was gonna do about my mistake. And I have figured it out. Basically, this is a total of 7 panels. Now, I only have 5 panels. And I thought that because this is an A-line skirt, it gets wider as you go down. And if I just like make my waistline like here somewhere, I probably don't need 7 panels. If I went low enough where it was still like not a super short skirt that I wouldn't wear and not have to cut out more panels, because I'm not ordering more of this fabric. I'm not going to have like a nice neat side seam like at my natural side. The only thing I really needed the side seam is for the pockets, and obviously I'm going to have to compromise having pockets in this dress because otherwise I don't have a dress. So yeah, I figured that if I go like a good chunk down, it'll get wide enough that it'll fit my waist around all like less panels. I don't know if I'm explaining this correctly. My waist is obviously the same size. I'm realizing now as I'm looking at this that like maybe that's not clear. So yeah, my waist is always the same. To achieve this size of waist, I need 7 panels. If I only have 5 panels, I need the like width of them, of each of them, to be bigger at the waist. I just pinned the side seams I pinned all of it to each other roughly around the seam allowance. And then I just put it around my waist and like I kept like folding it down until I could have a width that I was comfortable with, that I had like enough for the button placket and all that stuff. And that came to about like 25.5 centimeters. So I did mark that on one of the panels, and now I have to mark it on all of them, chop that off. But yeah, basically that makes the dress like just above my knee, or like roughly at knee length. We're getting to a point now of my stash busting where I do still have quite a lot of fabric, but it's like kind of slimmer pickings. I don't have a lot of like big lengths of things that then match with each other. So like if I need something to, you know, be aligning or something, I have to really think about it. I have to make a lot of compromises because I don't have as big of a selection as I had before. At some point, I'm going to just have to maybe destash some of these fabrics. I maybe just don't like them that much, and that's why I haven't used them to this point. And then there's also the fact that right now it's summer, so I'm working with my like lighter weight fabrics, and then I have a few wools and wool blends to work with in winter. So anyway, so today's plan is to cut out my interfacing and fuse it, and hopefully do as much sewing as possible. It's now 10:45. So let's see how much work I can get done. I went ahead and cut my interfacing and fused it. I have linked my favorite interfacing in the description, which is not the same that I'm using here, because I got this one to try out from my local fabric shop and I don't love it, so I don't really want to recommend it to people, but I am still using it because, you know, stash busting. Anyway, I started putting the collar together, which is just pinning around the 3 edges with right sides together. Viscose Challis is very drapey and wants to move around a bunch, so don't be scared to use lots of pins. I stitched it in place, trimmed the seam allowance, flipped the collar right side out, and pressed it in place. Then I top stitched around the same 3 outer edges and put the collar to the side. I worked on the sleeves next. I started by adding 2 rows of gathering stitches at the sleeve cap of each sleeve. Then I pinned the sleeves close with right sides together and stitched it in place. I trimmed the seam allowance and used a zigzag stitch to finish the raw edges before pressing the seam allowance to one side. To make the cuff, I started by pinning up a narrow hem for the sleeve to finish the raw edges. This is slightly overkill. I could probably just do a zigzag stitch, but I thought this would help me make double sure I'll get a really nice finish on this cuff. Anyway, I stitched my narrow hem and pressed it. Then I fold in a bit more than I want the cuff to be. I did 3 centimeters or 1 1/8 of an inch, but I could also have just followed the fold lines marked on the pattern. I top stitched that in place exactly over the stitching of the narrow hem and pressed it again. Now I could turn the cuff over to the outside along the stitching line, leaving the seam allowance and the stitching on the inside. The plan is to slip stitch that by hand, but I'm just gonna put it to the side for now. I moved on to work on the bodice, which is super easy. First, I put 2 lines of gathering stitches between the marked spaces on the pattern for both the front and back pieces. Then I pinned the fronts to the back along with the shoulders and sides with right sides together. The pattern instructions have you do just the shoulder seams and then add the sleeves while they're open, and then close all of the side seams in one go when you already have the skirt pieces on the bodice. But I just feel like that means unnecessarily annoying maneuvering of fabric on the machine when it's so much easier to manage the pieces individually, and I really don't mind setting in sleeves. So after I stitched those seams, I trimmed the seam allowance, finished the raw edges with a zigzag stitch, and pressed them towards the back. I do have to say this pattern has 2 different seam allowances, which I also found unnecessarily confusing. They say 1 centimeter or 3/4 of an inch, and then 6 millimeters or 1/8 of an inch for internal seams like facings, collars, etc. And I just have a few questions. Why not make them all the same? What are internal seams? Aren't all seams internal? I don't know. If somebody has the answer to those, please leave it in the comments. Anyway, I stitched my tag to the back facing since the bodice is finished for now. I pinned the front and back facings together at the shoulder seams. Now, because I added extra width to the front facings, I had to true them up at the top so that the edges meet with the back facing. So I did that with my quilting ruler. I stitched the shoulder seams, trimmed the seam allowance, finished the raw edges with a zigzag stitch, and pressed the seam allowance towards the back. I put the facings to the side and started putting the skirt panels together, the moment of truth, if you will. So as I mentioned before, I needed to shorten my panels by 25.5 centimeters or 10 inches from the top. So I used my tape measure to mark that down from the raw waistline edge on all of my panels. I cut off all the excess as I went, leaving a little bit of seam allowance, and then I pinned the panels together as I went as well. Of course, once the skirt is pinned together, I stitched all the seams, then I trimmed the seam allowance and zigzagged all of those seams before pressing them towards the back. It is now 12:43, so it's been 2 hours since I started, and this is the progress that I have made. I have my sleeves pretty much done. I just have to this slip stitching, but I'm going to do that in a bit. My collar ready to go. I have my facings also sewn up and ready to go. Oh, I need to trim them actually, so should do that soon. And then I also have the bodice put together to have the gathering stitches in, ready to go for when we put everything together. And I just finished putting the skirt together, and I have it on the dress form so it can hang for a while. I think it needs to hang. My experience with this fabric is that even if it's not particularly flared, it always drops quite a bit. So I definitely want to leave it hanging for at least overnight, if not more. So I'm going to hang it for now. So what needs to happen next is I'm going to start putting everything together. I'll probably attach the sleeves to the bodice next, then put the bodice and the skirt together, and then start working on the facings. And I think the collar and the facings all get sewn up at the same time. And then if I remember correctly, then we work the button placket. I'm quite happy I chopped off as much as I did, because that means a few less buttons that I have to add to this. Pretty good work for 2 hours. I guess I'll see you when I work on this again. I worked on the dress some more in the afternoon, and I started by trimming the excess length from the facings. I removed the same amount as for the skirt pieces. In hindsight, I probably could have just left this and trimmed it when I evened out the hem. Once that was done, I went ahead and hand stitched the sleeve cuff in place, trying to make these stitches as invisible as possible. Here's your quick reminder to stay hydrated. Then it's time to start putting things together. And I'm starting by sewing the sleeves to the bodice. I pin each sleeve to its respective side of the bodice, usually matching the notches. As always, I don't ease the sleeves in, but instead use the excess ease to do a little shoulder gather. When I have both sleeves pinned in place, I stitch them in. At this point, my machine started acting up, so I opened it to find some pretty chunky dust bunnies hiding in there. So I cleaned those out real quick and got back to sewing. It never ceases to amaze me how dust buildup can so directly impact the quality of your stitches. Once the sleeves are in, I trimmed the seam allowance and used a zigzag stitch to finish the raw edges. And of course, I pressed the seams with the help of my tailor's ham. I moved on to join the skirt with the bodice, and because I have fewer panels than I expected, I can't rely on matching the seams from the bodice to the skirt to make sure I'm pinning this correctly, which is especially important when you have gathers instead of darts in the bodice. So here's what I did. I started by pinning the front opening edges together. Then I found the center back of the bodice and the center back of the skirt panel, and I matched those. For the bodice side seams, I matched those with the center of each side panel. All I had to do then was pin out from those points and pull on the gathers until the bodice fit the skirt. For some reason, I lost the footage of sewing the waist seam, but I did sew it, and then I trimmed the seam allowance and zigzagged the raw edges before pressing them up towards the bodice. All that's missing is the facings, so I got to work on that next. First, I pinned the collar to the dress with the uninterfaced side of the collar up against the right side of the dress. I matched the center of the collar and the center of the back bodice piece to make sure it was placed correctly. With the collar pinned, I grabbed the facings and I pinned them to the dress with right sides together, sandwiching the collar. I started at the back facing, matching the shoulder seams, then down the front on each side. Then I stitched that in place, taking it slow, especially around the collar area. I clipped those more rounded areas and pressed. I realized I hadn't finished the raw edges of the facings, so I did a narrow hem for those. I'm not really sure why I did that. I think I just wanted them to be very neat. Anyway, once I had that done, I flipped the facings to the inside and top stitched all around the dress to help keep my facings firmly on the inside of the dress. I've basically put the whole dress together, but considering how much I think the fabric already dropped in the few hours that I left it dropping, I'm gonna actually leave it overnight before I hem it. And basically, all I have left to do is hem and then do the buttons. But I don't like doing my buttons until I've got the hem done, so I know how much of a gap I want to leave from the hem to the last button. So yeah, I'm just gonna leave this here for now and come back to it tomorrow and hopefully finish it tomorrow. So yeah, I guess I will see you tomorrow. The next day, I started evening out the hem, so I did my usual technique of sitting on the floor with my tape measure and some pins and measuring the distance from the shortest point of the skirt hem to the floor and then marking that same distance all around the hem of the skirt. I chopped off the excess along the pins. To start working on the hem, I flipped the facings to the outside and stitched them down to the skirt about 1.5 centimeters or 5/8 of an inch from the raw edge. Then I trimmed just the facings, turned them back to the inside, and started pinning up the hem. The theme of the day is narrow hems apparently, so that's the plan for the skirt hem as well. I top stitched that in place. Before moving on to the buttons, I tacked the facings to the waistline and shoulder seam allowances to make sure it stays put. Then I used the buttons I chose for this dress, the same vintage round orange shank buttons that I used on the floral blouse you just saw me wearing, and I used those to mark the placement and size of my buttonholes. I like to add a button on the waistline seam to keep it closed because that area tends to gape for me on all shirt dresses, and then I used that to determine the placement for the rest of the buttons. When I had all of that marked, I switched my regular sewing machine foot for the buttonhole foot and started making the buttonholes. Once I had them all done, I used the buttonholes to mark the placement of the buttons on the other opening edge and started sewing them by hand. Just sitting here, sewing buttons. I was thinking about my granddad. My grandmother was a seamstress. I think I've talked about this before. And granddad would come home from work and then help my grandmother with her sewing. Didn't know how to sew, so he did some things to help her, like he was the one who maintained her sewing machine. Had like a treadle sewing machine. She didn't have, it was an electric. So he maintained it for her. The other thing he did was sew buttons. So my grandmother her specialty was making men's like shirting and undergarments and things. So she made men's like boxers. She was born in like the late 30s and she started sewing or like working for a seamstress or like apprenticing when she was 13. So around the 50s, this would be, had her own like business, I guess. You may not know this, but back in the day, a seamstress who made men's shirting would also make ties and boxers. That was like the three things that they would specialize in. And so she worked with tailoring places, like you may be a tailor and you'd have like a shop where you sold things, and you'd have ready to wear things like shirts and stuff, but you would also have then a service of where you could order things in your own size. My grandmother did both of those things. For some stores, she would make like the shirts to the size that people ordered. And then for other stores, she might just make like collars and cuffs. And then another lady or another seamstress would make all of the, bodices, and the other lady would make all of the sleeves. And then there would be another lady who did all of the putting things together. And they did not work in like a factory or anything. They worked from home. My mom would then take the finished cuffs to the store, and then the lady who had to put the cuffs on the sleeves would go and pick it up and things like that. It was a very long time ago. So a lot of times when my grandmother had a lot of orders and a lot of work to do, at the end of the day, my granddad would come home from work and he would sit on the sofa and he would sew all of the buttons for her. And he said that that was his thing, that was the only thing he knew how to sew. He knew how to thread a needle and sew a button. And he was like, nobody could match me, because I would basically keep going until you couldn't fit the needle through the hole of the button anymore. And whenever he saw me sewing a button or like anything that was remotely even close to him being able to tell this story, he would tell this story. He was very proud of himself for knowing, like being so good at sewing buttons, which I always thought was quite amusing. Every time I sew a button, I think of that. It's just funny how, I can't call him up and be like, hey, Granddad, I was just sewing a button and it made me think of you. It's nice to remember. Maybe next time you sew a button, you're going to think of my granddad saying that. I'm sure he would be very happy about that. I don't think I'm going to try to get the pictures today, because we are having a very intense heat wave right now, probably around like 37 degrees Celsius, which is like 98 or something, 99, something around there. So it's very, very hot out today. And you may not know this about Portugal, but we have very dry heat. We'll probably get them tomorrow, because we're supposed to have a little bit lower temperatures tomorrow. I think it's going to be 27 tomorrow, which is still hot, but it's not as like horribly hot. I guess the next thing you're going to see is the reveal. It is wrap-up time. The dress is done. Considering the amount of mistakes and like changes of plans that we had to do because of like the amount of fabric that I had and not cutting enough panels and all that stuff, I think considering all of that, it came out really great. It fits really well. It's a little bit baggy. Actually, I think I may have given myself a little bit too much room in the skirt, and then obviously the amount of gathering I did for the bodice depended on that. I'd actually prefer it to be a little bit on the baggy side, especially if it's like a summer breezy kind of dress, because then it won't be too tight and uncomfortable. The fabric is really comfortable, cool and breezy. It has a really nice drape, so it feels very comfortable. It doesn't cling. However, I do have some qualms with it. I didn't think about the fact that I was using a different kind of fabric for the facing. The drape of the dress and the drape of the facings is different. If I was going to use a fabric that's a lot more sturdy than this viscose, which I did, I used like a cotton, like a normal cotton weave, but obviously that's a lot less drapey than this viscose. I probably shouldn't have also interfaced it, because already the cotton was going to give the viscose a lot of structure. So using interfacing on top of that was kind of overkill, and I think it makes the facings like a little bit too stiff, and it means that they don't move with the dress as well as they could if they were also viscose, or if I hadn't interfaced them, if in the case of using a cotton. I'm pretty happy with it. I think it came out really cute. Probably not the last summer dress I'm going to make this year. Definitely not the last one I'm going to make in my life. I hope there's still a lot of summer dresses in my life to be made. But yeah, I think it's a pretty easy make. It's a like simple pattern. I don't love the instructions. I think the instructions on this pattern are not very good. Even for me, I had made this before, but it's been a while, so I didn't really remember all that well, like what I was supposed to be doing. And like there are some diagrams, but the diagram is very confusing, and there's then some written instructions, which are okay for some of the steps of the dress. And then for example, for the cuff of the sleeve, there's no written instructions for what you're supposed to do. All it says is it has a little diagram that says like hem and then flip the cuff over. And like the problem that I have with that is that if this was like an intermediate or advanced pattern, I get that you're assuming a lot of knowledge, but if you're going to label something as easy and like beginner friendly, then you really should have like more thorough explanation for things like that, because a beginner probably wouldn't have that knowledge already. I think I mentioned this already in the video, but mistakes are totally part of the process. I think I probably always make a mistake in every single garment that I make. And sometimes things just happen, or you have to make do with what you have. Like you don't have that much fabric, so you have to kind of work around that. What I'm trying to say is I think it's a really good skill to have to be able to creatively problem solve when you're sewing. I think that a lot of that comes from experience. So like just doing and making the mistakes and then having to figure it out. But I think for me with sewing, it was always like when I started sewing, I didn't have the experience, but I kind of always just threw myself into it and just decided to try, because the worst thing that's going to happen is nothing. Like you don't get a garment, you don't, succeed in making that project. And yeah, okay, maybe you have that fabric that now is not usable anymore. If you're unsure or like you're starting out, I think definitely use cheaper fabrics so you can do that with like less guilt. And that's definitely what I did when I was learning, was I just used like old bed sheets and thrifted fabrics and things that I found, like reused old clothes that I didn't like anymore, and like cut up the fabric and used that for making new things. And I think that really gives you this kind of freedom and like relieves a lot of the pressure of like having to have something at the end, because I didn't pay anything for it, or I paid like €1 or €2 for it. So it's like, that's not really a huge loss if I don't end up with a finished complete garment that I'm happy with. I think anything you do with your hands, a lot of crafting, you have to learn by doing, and you're going to make mistakes. You're going to be bad at it. The first garments you're going to make are going to suck. And that's fine. That's okay. That's totally fine. That's exactly what you're supposed to be doing. That's how you're going to learn. As you make mistakes, you'll probably like repeat some of the sillier mistakes less often, or you're going to be better at fixing them. You don't make less mistakes as you get better at sewing. You just make different mistakes, figure out how to work around them. You figure out how to maybe sometimes use your mistakes to your advantage. And I think something to remember is that the vast majority of people around you who are going to see you in that garment, they don't know what the pattern said. They don't know what it was supposed to look like. All they're seeing is the finished product. We tend to be very critical of our own work because we spend so many hours looking at the thing, and like so closely, we see all the wonky stitches, we see the little tucks, we see the little mistakes, and other people don't see that. Most other people don't have sewing experience. They don't know what they're looking at. That's something that really should help you kind of take the pressure off. But then you can also say, oh, that's what it's supposed to be. That could be a design feature instead of a flaw. I think mistakes are good in a healthy dose. It's really all about what you make of them and not so much the mistake itself. I think it's kind of like what you learn from it and what you take from that and how you manage the mistake and how you kind of fix it. I think that speaks a lot more to you as a crafter or in like as a person than really the mistake itself, because everyone makes mistakes. That's kind of one thing we have in common. Every single person has made a mistake, will make more mistakes in their life, and will probably have made a mistake today. Even if they don't know it yet, they probably already made a mistake today. I know I have. So yeah, that's my wrap up. That's everything I have to say about this dress and about this video. And making mistakes, it's all part of the process. And I guess you should subscribe if you want to see me make more mistakes and how I fix them in the future. Leave me a comment if you want to. Let me know what mistakes have you made recently in your crafting. You can also follow me on Instagram and TikTok. Everything is linked below. All of the materials that I can link, I have in the description. Some of them are affiliate links. Yeah, so if you're considering buying them, That would really help me out if you used my link, contribute to keeping the channel running. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.